Thank you, Ben, and thank you, panellists. That was really informative. Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Okay, now we have our next session, which is called Screening In, Advancing People-Centred, Pro-Nature, Profitable and Inclusive Forest Projects, Lessons Learned from the New Generation's Plantations. We have an interesting setup for this one. We have Candice Taylor coming to the front, who's going to hold the fort up there, fly the flag. But we have several people online for this session, including the moderator. So is it possible to bring up Luis? Can we see him online? Be nice to see his face.
Good morning, Lyndall.
Oh, hello.
Morning,
we can
everyone.
hear you. We can't see you yet.
I hope you'll see me.
I hope we can
and
see you.
Good morning to the audience from a distant Brazil.
Ah, there you go. You're here.
Very early.
You're with us. There you go. Okay,
and
great.
Apologies for not being able to be there at the Congress, but thank you for making it possible to join online.
No problem, Luis. So, okay, so Luis will be leading this session online. So I'll be here in case there's some assistance required. Luis Neves Silva is the New Generation Plantations lead for the Forests Forward program at WWF. Now, so with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Luis, to do your introduction and then start to hand to the speakers who are online and then Candice in the room. And unless something goes wrong, I'll leave it with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much again. And good morning. Thank you for joining us for this session. The idea for the session is to bring us closer to the landscapes and to hear some voices from those who are implementing a list of projects trying to respond to many of the aspects that we have heard during the day on this special event. We'll bring projects from 3 different geographies. Beto Mesquita from Ciclus will bring us a project being implemented in Bahia, in Brazil. While Candice, there with you, Candice Taylor represents the New Forest Company, who is working already for almost 10 years with NGP in Uganda, also developing a very interesting landscape project that she will share with us some of the aspects, especially thinking in terms of how to bring in the smallholders into the value chain of NFC. And Nguyen Vu from WWF Vietnam will talk us through a cooperative project in the Central Annamites landscape, where they are adding value through for certification to the plantations and developing a landscape approach in the region. In the end, Shauna Matkovic will take us a little bit through the narrative and the model that we are following on the New Generation Plantations initiative led by WWF, and how we see adding value in terms of linking this with investors and trying to bring the multiple values that these projects are developing into the pipeline of these investors. And so without further delay, I will start inviting the speakers who are really those who we want to hear. And let's start by Beto Mesquita from Ciclus, and to tell us about the project they are developing in southern Bahia with the indigenous Pataxó people, restoring and connecting natural forest fragments. Beto, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Luis. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It depends which part of the world you are. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. Thanks for this invitation to share some our challenges and our experiences here. Let me share. I think that I am available to share my screens. Okay, it is working.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. So we just, in a nutshell, share with you some lessons and our experience with the project called Shapes of Nature. We are working with Pataxó people. Pataxó is indigenous people living in the southern Bahia, in the Atlantic Forest region, Atlantic Forest biome. Atlantic Forest is one of the hot spots in the world for biodiversity, but a hot spot means that it's a very special place in terms of we can find there a high biodiversity, a high endemism level, but also a high deforested level. All the hot spots lost more than 70% of the original coverage. So it is a very dangerous ecosystems. And then we are working with different approaches to protect the remnants and also to restore, to reestablish ecological connections among those remnants. Okay. The current context on this region, we have a very special place. We call this region as a hotspot in a hotspot, which is located in the central corridor of Atlantic Forest. There are 3 terrestrial national parks and 1 marine national parks, 7 indigenous lands in the same area, and hundreds of thousands hectares of eucalyptus plantation in the surrounding. Those places, it's very special, and we can emphasize this through the recognition by UNESCO from the United Nations as natural heritage sites. But in the same region, about 30,000 native trees are cut down every year, especially to produce wood and handcrafts. Part of them produced by the Pataxó people. Most of this wood comes from, unfortunately, illegal logging. Trees that are cutting inside the national parks, especially the Monte Pascoal and Descobrimento national parks. We are estimating about almost 4,000 square meters of native lands, and this kind of activity, this kind of economic activity, in spite of the illegality of the illegal aspect of this activity, it's increased the threats on endangered hardwood. Here are some images of the current handcrafts, wooden handcrafts that they are producing there. And here are some newspapers headlines showing the situation, the current situation. We have problems with the environmental fiscalization. We have a lot of problems in terms of the supply for this wood. And what's happening, in spite of we can working with indigenous people not only to stop the degradation of the native parks, but also to find alternatives. And in terms of the alternatives, we're looking for the alternatives to keep them in the same in a specific economic activities that they are engaged for many years. But our challenge is change the source of wood for them, change the relationship with the forestry management skills, and also change the commercial and the managerial skills of those indigenous peoples in terms of to increase their activities. I can summarize our proposals in 3 terms. In short terms, we are working to replace the wood used by Pataxó artisans from native wood illegally logged from the national parks to wood from tree plantations. Tree plantations in that case means including eucalyptus plantation, because we have a lot of sources of eucalyptus in the region, in spite of the species that they are planting there for, there is a more suitable for pulp and paper production. We are looking for for wood production, we have to implement some different plots of eucalyptus, special for wood production. But also, we are working in the indigenous lands with the communities to develop a new restoration activities that we call the productive restoration, to implement native tree plantations to produce wood and to produce other natural ecosystem services. In the middle term, we are working to implement different types of capacity building activities to improve the quality of Pataxó wooden handcrafts, but also especially to strengthen their skills on business and on marketing. It includes, in addition, the funds that we're providing by the Southern Bahia People and Nature funds. We are working with the New Generation Plantation to achieve other funds related to microcredits, microloans systems to provide more funds, more tangible funds for those indigenous people. And in the long term, for sure, promote the self-supply of wood, because the Pataxó people have lands, they have open areas in the past for agriculture, they have areas suitable for forest production on this region. So in a very, very short history here, we're looking to transform a reality. We're looking for establish different connections and different relationships of the landscape, including NGOs, community people, indigenous people, and also the marketing. We're achieving some specific niches of markets in the high, we call it high design markets on this region. So this is a project developed by Ciclos, which is a NGO established in 2018 in this region, in partnership with Arboretum. Arboretum is a government project implemented by the Public Attorney and the Brazilian Service of Forestry. Beaver Hill is another NGO based on Rio de Janeiro State, working for to develop market solutions for environmental assets, and it's supported by FASB, which is the Southern Bahia People and Nature Funds, and New Generation Plantations. So, Luis, it's just a very summarized, and then we can open to a question.
Thank you for sticking to the time, and we'll certainly come back to you with questions during the Q&A session. But thank you for the excellent resume. With that, let's move to Uganda and to hear from Candice the work that New Forest Company is developing there. Candice, over to you.
Thanks, Lewis, and hello everyone. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. Could you put my slides up, please? So my name is Candice Taylor. I've been with the New Forest Company for about 4 years. The NFC has existed in East Africa since about 2004. We manage around 30,000 hectares of land in Uganda and Tanzania. Of that, 1/3 is reserved for conservation purposes, and we are FSC certified in both territories. We've spent a lot of time building a shared value business model, which emphasizes growing our relationship with our neighbors to ensure we have a social license to operate. That means we have to date over 6,000 hectares of mapped, verified outgrower plots who not only received seedlings from us, but significant silviculture trainings, fire trainings, and they have been brought into our strategic timber supply chain. Next slide, please. Now, our challenge is that due to poverty in East Africa and high population growth rates, many of our smallholder tree farmers don't manage to get their trees to grow to maturity. By 6 or 7 years, they've cut them already for $10, for a fraction of the value of that tree, were it to sit in the ground until it reaches maturity. Why do they cut their trees? Primarily because they need school fees, they need to pay for medical costs. It's day-to-day cash. So we've worked with alternative livelihoods, developing apiculture, microfinance projects, and other livelihoods projects, but it's still not making the impact that we wanted. So 2 years ago, we decided that we needed to take a landscape approach, which is very key to the NGP principles, and part of that means working with our neighbors to turn them into landscape stewards. And that means we all need to benefit from the land that we're managing. And what we recognized was that the carbon markets were recovering and that we needed to benefit from the conservation areas that we manage, and the outgrowers needed to get interim cash flows for the trees that they're growing. Next slide, please. So together with NGP and following their principles, we developed a more mature tree grower support program that enables us to track and create all the data and all of that due diligence you've been hearing about in order to qualify for a carbon project with VCS. We recently submitted our PDD after spending a good 18 months and having a carbon consultant on board, because it is a very, very tricky landscape to try and navigate. And part of the intention is not just to get carbon finance, but you'll see from the blue pyramids in my slide, is to actually leverage that into timber diversification processing. As we heard from the Gabon Minister for the Environment earlier, we don't just want to grow trees and export them. We want to process them and create value addition in Uganda to stimulate the local bioeconomy there. Next slide, please. So in summary, this community-focused project is expected to generate over 2 million tons of carbon credits in the next 30 years. That does include some of that conservation area on the NFC plantations that I mentioned. In total, it's a landscape of 37,000 hectares. And one of the key safeguards that we put in place was the strengthening of 18 tree grower associations, including an NGO, including WWF in Uganda and other independent observers, into a carbon steering group. So together they will make the decisions on the price once our 3-month audit process for the afforestation credits is completed. Next. We're very grateful to the Dutch Fund for funding some of this project. And I just want to mention that although there is a lot of ESG due diligence required to get some of this funding, having FSC certification, being a member of WWF NGP, that certainly sped up the process for us. But I would encourage, if there's any lessons from this conference, climate change is real. And by raising the bar of FSC, raising the bar of due diligence, we're only going to make it more difficult for companies and communities to benefit. So please, would all parties keep that in mind. Next slide. Some of the positive benefits. When we designed the project, it was important that it would have a landscape approach. So households with a focus on women and youth, stimulating the rural economy, protecting riparian zones, significant commitments to afforestation, being net planters, changing the culture around cutting trees, around being landscape stewards, and for us as a company also having a more secure timber supply that makes us more attractive also for investment. Next slide. Thank you very much for your time. I'll hand you back to Luis.
Thank you very much, Candice. Excellent presentation. To the point, and also with a clear message in terms of we need to develop these complex projects addressing the multiple values on the landscape, but let's also keep in mind that by raising the bar, we might excluding those that we want to benefit more. And with this, I'll invite Vu to take us through the FOSDA project in the Central Annamites landscapes. Vu, over to you.
Thank you, Luis. I would like to share my screen. Do you see my screen already?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I would like to invite you to visit one smallholder group FSC certified for plantation in Central Annamite of Vietnam, one place in Rito Mekong. This is about the sustainable value chain of an FSC certified smallholder forest. Thus, we have support them from 2016. So the name of the association called it Forest Owners Sustainable Development Association of Thừa Thiên Huế Province. Short name is FOSTA. So they come from the individual smallholder gathering to become a group and supported by the WWF Vietnam to achieve the FSC certified for their plantation. So after 5 years, they become a full legal association with more than 1,000 members and with more than 6,000 hectares of FSC certified. They come from the individual smallholder, but now they become more and more professional, operate with the full legal association, and they are on the progress of the setting up the Union of Sustainable Forest Cooperative. So cooperatives, what does this mean? This is come from the FSC certified smallholder group, and they transform to the association, and with the capacity building and unit improvement, they transform to the cooperative. So what we see the highest impact from their development progress is, at the beginning, they are receiving our support. Our is mean WWF Vietnam, but now they become our partner who can provide the advisory service to replicate the best practice of the program to another province and expanding the sustainable supply chain. So this is their supply chain. FSC smallholder of the Acacia plantation. So they form, and now they have several sustainable forestry cooperatives under the coordination of the FOSTA, the umbrella association. So they supply the FSC sawwood to the local processing company, that this company also supply the raw material, the semi-product to the final processing company for furniture to export, like IKEA supplier. In the other hand, they also supply the chipwood as the FSC chipwood to another supply chain. So this is what we call it the sustainable supply chain of FOSTA. So what is the role of the NGP in big pictures? So NGP come to smallholder in Central Annamai and in Vietnam to create a platform for sharing and learning and catching up the opportunity for improving their business to become more bankable. So based on that, we continue to support them to incubate their business plan to become let's say, more responsible to the conservation, more landscape approach, orientation, and finally can achieve the bankable project development target. So from 2019 until now, so NGP support the smallholder in Central Annamai landscape of Vietnam in several aspects. So it's not only focused on the acacia plantation timber, but currently there's also support more on the small and medium enterprise in the aspect of non-timber forest products and also agroforestry products like ginseng, like rattan, and coffee under the buffer zone near the nature forest. So this is, we see that NGP is played a very important role. Thus, we would like to continue to cooperate with them to develop more opportunity for the smallholder in the Central Annamai landscape to access to the bankable project funding or investment from BFCD, for example, or Landscape Resilience Fund. So this is what we continue in the next coming time to continue to expanding the business of the FOSTA as the best practice in one province to replicate to another province in the Central Annamai landscape of Vietnam. So thank you. That is our story that I'm on behalf of Forestry to tell to you. So welcome any question. So I can provide more clarification for you later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Vu. Thank you very much also for taking us through the Central Annamites smallholders cooperatives and their work with the FSC certification. So having heard from 3 different projects coming from 3 different geographies and also how they are approaching work at the landscape level, involving the local communities, addressing aspects of conservation or restoration of natural forests and developing timber plantations that will connect with the multiple value chains. Shauna Matkovic will now take us through how we have been structuring the NGP model, aiming to bring these multiple partners working together on those landscapes and enabling them to contact and connect with different type of investors with the right profile of investors. So Shauna, also a good morning to you, and please take us through the NGP investment case. Over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Lewis. And thank you for all the other earlier presenters, which helped provide an excellent framework for what I'm going to talk about now. I guess an important place to start is looking at the evolution of new generation plantations. So WWF's NGP has been around for about 12 years now. And it originally started as a learning platform. So how most of you in Vietnam, in Uganda, in Brazil, and in other parts of the world, you came into the NGP ecosystem, so to speak, through this learning platform, through the study tours. And this original platform had the purpose of bringing together industry players, NGOs, governments, research organizations, basically different parties working on the landscape to share best practices and lessons learned. So over these years, NGP has been working with its partners and its ecosystem to basically identify opportunities, understand the challenges, and figure out solutions on how to best improve the landscape so that everyone benefits. And from this, there's been a natural evolution. So where NGP started as an aggregator, bringing people together, it's now working, as you can see from the projects that were presented earlier, to becoming much more engaged and much more working almost as a project implementer. So as the demand for projects like this is increasing, NGP thought it was time to kind of sit back and develop its strategy around how to increase this impact going forward. So with that, a starting point was to identify the unique value proposition of NGP as it moves into project implementation. So even though it's relatively new as an implementer, it comes with 12 years experience. So it's not new with a new project, it's working with projects on the ground that have been developing these solutions for several years. And with that, it has its collaboration with WWF and WWF's associated forest programs. And it has a strong network on the ground, as I mentioned, with implementers, research organizations, and industry partners. So then moving forward, the question to figure out where NGP is best suited in the forest landscape finance approach, it was important to identify the investment gap. So realizing there are different parties operating in the space, servicing different challenges and capitalizing on different opportunities, we wanted to look at where's the opportunity for NGP. So we wanted to identify this gap of where NGP could fill it. So over the past 12 years of working in forest landscapes, NGP has been actively involved in both the commercial side and the NGO side of restoration and conservation activities. It has seen the commercial strengths of the efficiency, scale, and long-term self-sustainability or commercial viability of these businesses, but it's also seen the limitations with respect to a lack of resources that are able to address the environmental and social needs of the landscape outside of their operational focus. On the philanthropic side, it's seen the
Shauna,
strength.
may I ask you,
Yes.
do you see there on what you are describing, NGP having developed different approaches when the conditions on the landscapes, they were different in terms of how the communities, they were structured and how
Yes,
we have,
exactly.
yeah.
So through doing this exploration exercise and what you've seen already today in the earlier presentations, there are two different approaches that NGP is working with its principles. So again, just going back briefly, the NGP principles are about maintaining ecosystem integrity, protecting and enhancing high conservation values, developing these projects through effective stakeholder involvement, and contributing to economic growth and employment. So though those principles remain the same, there's been different approaches and different landscapes to execute those principles. So what we see, for example, in Candace's example of New Forest Company is what we're calling the community company bridge. And this is a situation where there's kind of mutual benefit and reliance from working together. So where NGP supports communities and the companies to work together to mitigate risk and to leverage opportunities that they wouldn't be able to do alone. On the other side, we have the community to commercial evolution. Can you hear me still? I see my screen is frozen.
Yes.
Okay. So we have the community to commercial evolution. And this is where we look at projects like Beto introduced in Brazil, where you have a strong group of local stakeholders who are already working on the landscape. And NGP comes in to support these, to professionalize them, to support them with access to markets, and perhaps even later on investment to scale their operations. So there's these two different approaches that NGP is taking. With that, there's also three different activities that NGP is carrying out. So they work with both conservation and restoration of natural ecosystems. They work at sustainable wood production, and they work in agricultural improvement. So NGP doesn't tend to get involved in siloed projects. So where different landscape approaches might have a focus on a particular business model. So for example, only commercial reforestation. NGP tends to look at the whole landscape and see what the landscape needs in its entirety and tries to develop solutions that include all of those three activities. So within each project, you'll probably find a different mix of those activities within each approach.
Shauna, we are coming close to the time, but I'll still ask you, will this approach be part of the path in terms of delivering the multiple returns, and while looking into the very important aspects of carbon, biodiversity, and the social aspects in the landscape, but also in terms of looking for the economic activities that might provide the financial returns to investors?
Yeah, so as this strategy develops, NGP is really trying to focus its communication and its strategy on delivering these long-term outcomes. So compared to kind of short-term project funding, it's looking for long-term engagement with partners and investors. So where it is not looking for necessarily number of trees planted or number of jobs created, it's really looking for long-term impact creation. So improved biodiversity, improved carbon stocks, improved livelihoods. And it's looking for investors who are really interested in this long-term impact and not just the short-term project thinking. And with that, it's looking to, of course, leverage the increasing carbon markets as a way to attract investors. and to bring monetization to these ecosystem services, and also look at how other impacts can be monetized going forward. So whether that's biodiversity, whether that's the sustainable development of local people, this is part of the process going forward for NGP and what it's looking to develop an MRV system around and develop a financing mechanism for this.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for bringing us through the NGP model and how we are working in these different regions with different profiles of projects, but bringing them to the right profile of investors who seek this long-term engagement and projects with multiple returns. So we will open up to questions from the online and in the meeting room audience. But in the meanwhile, I will invite Vu to share with us a very short video from the FOSDA project. I know that Vu wanted very much to show us
Thank you very much, Luis.
From the landscape. So Vu, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. You see that? Can you see and hear?
Yes, we can see it. Yeah.
Quản lý rừng bền vững gắn với nâng cao chuỗi giá trị rừng trồng có chứng chỉ quản lý rừng bền vững FSC được xem là một trong những giải pháp thúc đẩy phát triển ngành lâm nghiệp của tỉnh Thừa Thiên Huế, chuyển đổi sang hướng phát triển xanh bền vững, góp phần bảo vệ môi trường và đa dạng sinh học, giảm thiểu các tác động của biến đổi khí hậu. Những kết quả nổi bật và thành công của Thừa Thiên Huế FOSDA sau 5 năm hoạt động trong quá trình phát triển nâng cao giá trị rừng trồng gỗ keo có chứng chỉ FSC từ năm 2016 đến năm 2020, không thể không kể đến vai trò và sự hỗ trợ tích cực của dự án Mây tre keo bền vững thông qua tổ chức WWF Việt Nam. Hội chủ rừng và phát triển rừng bền vững tỉnh Thừa Thiên Huế FOSDA chính thức được thành lập vào cuối năm 2016. Đại diện và bảo vệ quyền lợi của các chủ rừng quy mô nhỏ khi tham gia sản xuất kinh doanh rừng bền vững, đồng thời thúc đẩy, hỗ trợ các hộ chủ rừng tích cực tham gia hoạt động quản lý rừng bền vững theo tiêu chuẩn FSC. Từ con số chỉ có 14 chi hội với 241 thành viên, với diện tích rừng trồng tham gia chứng chỉ quản lý rừng bền vững FSC là 950 ha, thì sau 5 năm hoạt động, đến năm 2021 tăng lên 37 chi hội với hơn 1.110 hội viên. Diện tích rừng trồng được cấp chứng chỉ FSC toàn tỉnh nâng lên trên 6.015 ha. Khối lượng gỗ FSC các loại khai thác 297.576 tấn. Giá trị xuất khẩu đạt 14.231.896 đô la Mỹ. Các hộ tham gia chuỗi giá trị rừng trồng gỗ keo có chứng chỉ FSC đang có đầu ra khá ổn định, được công ty Scansia Pacific, trực tiếp là công ty Minh An và Hoàng Nga bao tiêu sản phẩm, mua theo giá thị trường cùng thời điểm và được hỗ trợ thêm từ 15 đến 20% tùy theo cấp tỉnh. Một trong những giá trị quan trọng của rừng trồng theo tiêu chuẩn FSC đó là phục hồi lại hệ sinh thái tự nhiên của khu vực. WWF Việt Nam đã hỗ trợ Thừa Thiên Huế FOSDA khuyến khích các chủ rừng trồng các cây bản địa, tạo thêm một hành lang sinh thái để các loài động vật hoang dã có môi trường sống khi diện tích rừng trồng đến thời điểm khai thác. Đây là một yêu cầu quan trọng của tiêu chuẩn FSC về việc duy trì và phát triển vành đai xanh vùng đệm, thích ứng trước tình hình biến đổi khí hậu hiện nay. Đến nay, Thừa Thiên Huế FOSDA đã triển khai thành lập 25 hợp tác xã lâm nghiệp bền vững. Các hợp tác xã này có vai trò trực tiếp cung cấp các dịch vụ lâm nghiệp, tập huấn hỗ trợ kỹ thuật cho người dân trong suốt quá trình trồng và quản lý rừng theo tiêu chuẩn quản lý rừng bền vững của FSC. Hoạt động của Thừa Thiên Huế FOSDA đã thường xuyên nhận được sự quan tâm của các cơ quan quản lý nhà nước từ trung ương đến địa phương và các tổ chức quốc tế. Đặc biệt, chuyến thăm hợp tác xã lâm nghiệp bền vững Hòa Lộc và Thường Nhật vào tháng 8 năm 2019, Phó Thủ tướng Trương Hòa Bình đã đánh giá cao vai trò của Thừa Thiên Huế FOSDA giúp các hộ nông dân trồng rừng thành lập được nhiều hợp tác xã lâm nghiệp bền vững. Đây là mô hình rất tốt và hiệu quả để nâng cao giá trị gia tăng của người dân trồng rừng. Chỉ đạo Ủy ban Nhân dân tỉnh Thừa Thiên Huế quan tâm, Bộ Nông nghiệp và Phát triển Nông thôn cần nhân rộng ra toàn quốc. Với sự tín nhiệm cao, năm 2019, WWF Việt Nam đã chọn Thừa Thiên Huế Forda cùng các tổ chức của 5 nước trong khu vực tham gia hội thảo về mô hình chuỗi giá trị liên kết với các doanh nghiệp hợp tác xã về tiêu thụ sản phẩm tại Thái Lan, thu hút sự quan tâm của nhiều nước về mô hình thành lập hợp tác xã lâm nghiệp bền vững của Thừa Thiên Huế Forda. Diễn đàn nhiều bên cùng phát triển tầm nhìn Trung Trường Sơn. Với sự tham gia trực tuyến của các tổ chức nhiều nước như Luxembourg, Phần Lan, Hà Lan, Thụy Điển, Mỹ, Thái Lan, Indonesia, cung cấp nguồn vốn vay ưu đãi cho hợp tác xã lâm nghiệp bền vững và các công ty doanh nghiệp chế biến lâm sản, đồng thời hỗ trợ nâng cao năng lực cho các tổ chức xã hội. Sau 5 năm hoạt động, từ một đơn vị đối tượng hưởng lợi từ WWF Việt Nam, đến nay Thừa Thiên Huế Forda đã ngày càng vững mạnh và khẳng định được uy tín và thương hiệu, chính thức trở thành một đối tác của WWF Việt Nam và tổ chức đơn vị doanh nghiệp khác. Bên cạnh việc duy trì phát triển chuỗi giá trị rừng trồng gỗ keo có chứng chỉ rừng FSC tại địa bàn tỉnh Thừa Thiên Huế, khắc phục được những tồn tại, không còn các lỗi lớn trong quá trình đánh giá chất lượng chứng chỉ rừng của những năm trước đây. Nhằm lan tỏa và nhân rộng hoạt động quản lý rừng trồng gỗ keo có chứng chỉ, trong thời gian qua, Thừa Thiên Huế Forda đã vững vàng tự tin hỗ trợ kỹ thuật cho hộ dân tham gia chuỗi giá trị rừng trồng gỗ lớn có chứng chỉ FSC tại tỉnh Quảng Bình, Đắk Lắk, giúp huyện Lệ Thủy, tỉnh Quảng Bình thành lập hội chủ rừng phát triển bền vững để phát triển chuỗi rừng trồng gỗ keo có FSC, góp phần không nhỏ trong chuỗi cung ứng nguyên liệu gỗ, phục vụ sản xuất trong nước và xuất khẩu của ngành gỗ Việt Nam.
A little bit of the central Annamites here into the session and with much more detail and better understanding of the work in there. With this, I will ask Lyndall to ask to the audience if and which questions to our participants and speakers.
Thanks, Louise. Does anyone... yeah. Does anyone in the room have any questions for any of our speakers today? No? Here we go. Anne.
I may volunteer to ask questions, I think. Maybe referring a little bit to the experience of the NFC and also that from Vietnam. Maybe my question to the panelists is that we've seen successful models of smallholder production and value chains from Vietnam and Mexico, for example, but it has not happened in too many countries. And especially the challenge has been that integration of smallholders into the higher value addition production models is still a puzzle. Shona mentioned that you are building capacities of the smallholders, and I think that's one of the maybe the bullets there to address the issue. But how do you see the future, the scaling up of the smallholder tree growing globally in other emerging, developing markets, and their integration into I would say, industrial value chains? Because I would see that we can't only operate in models where the smallholders, their cooperatives, associations are running the value chains by themselves fully. But I would see that especially if you're expecting the private sector to invest more in smallholder forestry, that would require also that type of larger scale industrial partners. I hope you got my point, so looking forward to your silver bullets.
Could you all hear that online?
I see Shauna raising the hand. Then Candice and Wu, you can also jump in.
Yeah, I will just quickly say from my kind of observations, I think this is part of the reason why NGP is going for this long-term approach. It's a long-term engagement. It also requires the caution of donor dependency. So you need to work together with the company who have this kind of long-term mentality. They're looking for viability. They're looking for self-reliance. donor dependence doesn't help the communities, it doesn't help them. So it's really a cooperation. Again, the companies, though, don't necessarily have the resources to be financing this learning process and these activities. So there is also a need for funding that can fill this gap to get to this long-term outcomes that are needed. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's the permanence. It's a key element here. But Candice or Vu, you want to add from your side?
Yes. Supplement for the idea from Shauna. I'd like to say something as the example from Forestry case. You know, at the beginning, is the company had been buy-in. At the beginning, when we start to have the smallholder in Vietnam to develop their supply chain. So this company is, we call it an anchor company. We find out them and involve them in the pool at the beginning together with our advisory support to help smallholder get more information from the market. What is their requirement? And finally come up with the business contract between the Forestry and the company. What kind of the terms in the contract? Company commit to source the timber sustainably from the smallholder for at least 5 years, including in the contract, and they support partly the annual audit cost. And in the other way, the Forestry and their smallholder group commit to improve the quality of their FSC certified acacia forest, comply with the FSC, expanding the raw material areas, and within that kind of contract. So the company together with the smallholder, they expanding more than 6,000 hectares within 5 years. So let's say the role of the anchor company in the supply chain is very important. This is one of our approach at the beginning. So this is an example of the Forestry case for your reference.
Thank you, Vu. And Candice, I will take the opportunity to another question that is in the chat box to you from Kelechi Elenia. What sustainable forms of investment did you make to diversify the livelihoods of people in the landscape to reduce the cutting trees before the full maturity? I think somehow this can be related also with the previous question.
Okay, first of all, I would say I agree with my colleagues that there's a supply and a demand side to this. It takes time to build the quality into the system, but we need to be going in the direction that the market is desiring. And to that extent, I would also say that the regulatory framework can facilitate or incubate this in a more supportive way. I'll give you an example from Uganda where we have been trying to do some market shaping. We don't really get a premium price for being FSC certified. There is still a large amount of timber which is not necessarily legal or certified on the market. And yet probably 90% of all infrastructure investments in Uganda are coming somehow from outside, from donor aid. And yet that donor aid is not having requirements around legal timber, around certified companies. So if the right indications were coming from the market and the institutions that control that market, I think we could speed up some of this process of encouraging inclusive outgrower models through certified companies. And to answer your second question around livelihoods, there are quite a lot of traditional models involving agroforestry, whether that's intercropping, apiculture. I think where we've tried to elevate it a bit is the inclusion of microfinance partners, because we ourselves don't want to be lending money to our growers, but we want to make sure that they have financial literacy, that they have access to benevolent credit, not large amounts of credit that they can manage, that they can pay back in a year or in a season. And We've also developed an innovative program where we pay our neighbors to do risk management. I've heard some colleagues talk about fire management, building fences, having security around their plantations. We don't have any of that. We rather chose to negotiate with our communities that they could provide those services for us. And we have a contract in place where on an annual basis, depending on their performance, they get a ratio of payment. This has been going since 2016 in Uganda, and we were able to reduce our fire and security risks by over 70%. So it's worth sometimes flipping it on its head and saying, that's a risk, but how can I turn it into an opportunity to empower, train, and create a livelihood for my neighbors?
Thank you very much. And being certain that's the key for success, I've seen that Beto has raised his hand. Because that's also part of a question I have here to Beto. Hearing these examples and how Candice has described in Uganda, and knowing what and how you are working in the project there with the Patachos, Beto, how do you see this mechanism also to be used in terms of scaling the projects and the activities to meaningful impact on the landscapes? And tell us a little bit also the way that you are working there with the Patachos.
Thank you, Luis. That's exactly the reason that I raised my hand, because hearing all the examples, and I'm thinking about the NGP whole on this process. I do believe that when you're talking about to work at landscape level, in many other regions that have opportunity to work or to share, sometimes you have all the factors. If I can establish a metaphor with a chemistry lab, so we have all the elements in the region, we have the stakeholders, the right stakeholders acting in our territory at landscape level. We have, temperature, pressure, but most of the time, we can looking for a catalytic factor, and NGP sometimes is using as in our region in the southern Bahia, because we have restoration activities, we have indigenous people working with forest management, we have FSC tree plantations in the place made by Suzano and Veracel, but we are looking for opportunities to put different stakeholders working together to establish a solution, to looking for solutions that we can establish at landscape level, to get an opportunity as a catalytic investment, a catalytic approach at landscape level. I think that is a key factor. And then that's the example that I was saying in Vietnam and other places. A catalytic investment could be change, could be transformed a reality at landscape level. And I do believe that it's a key factor for forest investments in the future.
Thank you very much. And I think this is taking us close to the end, but I still want to pose a final question to Shauna, which is looking into the landscape of investors, Shauna, and now with the discussion and with this profile in terms of how we are trying to create those solutions at the landscape level when finding different circumstances, but in the end, we have identified here the object and the model that we want to bring to the investors. How would you describe? Is there a match between the needs from the multiple partners in the landscapes and what the investors are looking for today?
Yeah, there is, and I mean, the evidence, I guess, is that NGP has been successful in raising this kind of investment so far. So recently, over the last couple of years, has raised about 10 million euros in project finance over the past couple of years, and is in the process of closing on another couple of projects. The investors' reasons for engaging in these projects are varied. So from one side, we see this, or the investors see it as an impactful way to learn about natural capital investment when they're new to the space. So they enter hoping to learn. So they want to achieve long-term impact while also learning about landscape investment, biodiversity investment, sustainable development of rural livelihoods. And on the other hand, many of them like the opportunity to deliver and generate climate benefits, and increasingly want to monetize the carbon value from these. So, and this is also looking at the NGP approach, where we've seen several examples today. We can see that these projects are of what is being called high quality in the space. So high quality in terms of a number of different values being generated, several co-benefits being generated, and especially given the multi-stakeholder driven approach. So NGP, we can really see that this is at the core of NGP's projects, where it's secondary in many other landscape approaches. So I see more investors coming to this space from the impacts that can be derived, and from the evolution of monetizing ecosystem services and co-benefits that are coming.
Thank you. And I think with this from my side, I will hand over to Lyndall to close there in the room. Lyndall, we have heard 3 projects with the landscape scale in different geographies, from South America across Africa into the Southeast Asia. We have heard about how we have been adaptive in terms of the local circumstances from social economic perspectives and the environmental challenges, but with this building complex, but with multiple returns projects at scale, and looking for the right profile of investors which are moving into this space. I hope we have been successful in sharing our lessons, and over to you to close there in the room. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you, Luis, and thanks to all our speakers, and particularly Candice here in the room. So with that, we'll close the session. And now, I'm very excited to say we have reached the final session of our day.